All right, more football news for Brian Kelly's staff, and it's starting to finalize here. He's got pretty much his on-the-field staff finalized, as yesterday the news came across the wire and made it official that Slade Nagel had been added to the staff as the tight ends coach and the special teams coordinator. So a big move for Nagel as he joins the program as the tight ends coach coming over from Tulane, as he's been over at Tulane for the last couple of seasons. And, of course, Tulane's experienced tremendous success under Willie Fritz and has done an incredible job of recruiting inside the state. Nagel's a guy that has spent time at state schools like McNeese and done some really good work while on Louisiana staffs. He played in the state of Louisiana. He's from the state of Louisiana. So he is another guy with Louisiana ties that you add to the staff that has tremendous experience in working the relationships and getting to know the high school coaches and getting to know the players and the prospects and putting him on this staff. And now that Kelly's on-the-field staff has been finalized, you can see what the premium and what the motive was when putting this staff together. Primarily, they wanted Louisiana experience. I mean, think about the guys that have been brought aboard here in this offseason. I mean, start by just the news yesterday. Officially, Cortez Hankton and Joe Sloan have been elevated to offensive coordinator. Both of those guys have Louisiana ties. Hankton from Louisiana, from New Orleans, has recruited the state for a long time, and Sloan is pretty much a Louisiana citizen, spending the past 15 years nearly here with his ties to Louisiana Tech, dating back to, going back to where he was calling plays there for Louisiana Tech. Both those guys who have been a part of the staff but now permanently in new roles, Louisiana ties. We mentioned Slade Nagel, new tight ends coach at Tulane. Played at Northwestern, spent time at McNeese. I mean, is just Louisiana tied to the state. And the defensive side, I mean, Bo Davis played at LSU, coached at LSU, spent time at LSU. Corey Raymond played at LSU, spent over a decade at LSU. Blake Baker's from Louisiana, played at Tulane, spent time at LSU for a season on the coaching staff. I mean, all of these guys have Louisiana ties, which is obvious that Kelly, the administration, was looking for in putting this staff together. I don't know if Kelly could have done any better than what he's done in replacing his entire defensive group and upgrading an offensive staff that, to me, was as dominant as any group in the country when you talked about his offensive coaching staff. I mean, you lose the offensive coordinator in Mike Denbrock, and you don't skip a beat.
You don't feel like you really lost anything, right?
You really don't.
Which is crazy, considering that you're coming off a football team that had the number one offense in the country. Is that because you feel like that it's because Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton can do it even though you have such a small sample size of one game as the offensive coordinator? Or do you not put a lot of stock into what Mike Denbrock was as a play caller or as an offensive coordinator because of just how good Jaden Daniels was? Like, it wasn't really a scheme. It was more of just Jaden Daniels put on your cape and go. Like, that's why I'm wondering why people aren't, because, I mean, there's been times when LSU has lost a coach, especially after an offensive or defensive performance like they had all year, where you were going, oh, it's always happens to LSU. They can't ever hold on to a staff. As soon as they get somebody, they want to go somewhere else. For Denbrock, it never felt like that was really the case. It felt like you were more concerned about losing Sloan or Hankton.
Well, and the way that I view college football now is really, it's a young man's world, game, man. Yeah. It is a young man's game. And Denbrock, for what he has accomplished and what he has done deserves the Broyles Award finalist, deserves the contract, deserves the money, deserves the stability, deserves to say, hey, I want to go home. I mean, like we said at the time, it is very rare in the coaching profession to be able to say, I want to go there, and it happened. I mean, even seasoned guys, experienced guys, veterans who have been in it for a long time, I mean, you understand that, I mean, you're in a washing machine. You kind of just going to get thrown where the openings are. And you got to make the best of it because, you know, it's not guaranteed that you'll be staying in the industry. So these guys go with a mentality, these people go with a mentality of you just make a life wherever they place you. And if it's on a year-by-year status, then that's just what it is. But ultimately, if you can get to a point where you say, hey, I want to be Notre Dame's play caller, because I lived, you know, I'm from there. My family's from there. We want to go back home. And ultimately it happened. You know, I mean, that alone shows you how good Mike Denbrock is at what he does. But in the grand scheme of what LSU is putting together, they have an offensive staff that the median age is, first, it's under 45. When you're talking about guys like Cortez Hankton, Brad Davis, Joe Sloan,
Baker,
the offensive guys.
Offensive, yeah, I mean the defensive staff too, but yeah,
but that's new.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, but the offensive staff has always been, from an idealistic standpoint of what you're looking for in college football. I mean, you're looking for young, motivated, hungry, out to prove, elite recruiters, dominant developers, and in all of those guys, they check the box. So if you lose a guy like Denbrock, who, you know, if you just walked into the room and you said, who's the outlier? You would probably say Denbrock is, right? Because, I mean, all of these guys look younger, motivated, you know, and this is not a knock. But I just think that's why it's easier to kind of keep your pace offensively, where you could go grab a guy who, like Slade Nagel, fits exactly. Now you walk into the room and you've got a bunch of guys that really mirror each other from like where they're from, but they're different in their skill set. But it all comes back to one place, right? Young, energetic, motivated. I mean, I can't imagine the recruiting wars that's happening internally, offensively, with those types of guys. And then to do what they've done on the defensive side to kind of match that, right? I mean, Matt House, it was announced yesterday, has been hired by the Jacksonville Jaguars to be their linebackers coach. Why does that mean anything here? Well, first off, LSU gets off the hook a little bit financially. It helps them out from a fiscal standpoint that you don't have to eat that entire contract. A lot like Corey Raymond's contract is put into place at LSU, where Florida is fitting the majority of the bill. Jacksonville now eats up a lot of the cost of Matt House's payout, buyout, where it stands. But House gets work, and you bring in a defensive staff that really kind of mirrors and it feels a lot like the offensive staff, right? Where you've got now youth, you've got energy, you've got guys that are motivated to go out there and find the best recruits. They've got the reputation where they can step into the living room and they can go up against anybody. You know, I mean, as we wake up here today on this Thursday morning, right? Thursday, January 25th of 2024. College football's face is who? Kirby Smart? Yesterday it was Jim Harbaugh. Harbaugh's now the Los Angeles Chargers coach. The Michigan job is open. By law, it has to stay open for 7 business days because of what the state says about open state vacancies. So we won't find out for at least another week on who's going to fill that role. So as we sit here today, there's only 3 coaches who have won national championships that are active in college football. Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, and Mack Brown. The landscape has changed over the last 24 hours and will continue to change depending on what Michigan decides to do in filling that role. So for LSU to be stacked on both sides of the line of scrimmage with young, energetic, motivated, hungry coaches, they have set themselves up in a spot to compete to get into this 12-team playoff year in, year out by being able to get the players, bring them in, develop them, put them on the field, and get them to the league. That's the formula. I know it's graduate champions and all of what goes on, but that is what the football player is looking for. Can you find me? Can you develop me? Can you shine me? Can you get me drafted? With them doing their part. And with that coaching staff that LSU has put together, that Brian Kelly finalized yesterday by adding Slade Nagel, they are set up to compete for championships as long as that commitment level stays where it's been proven by Brian Kelly over the last 2 weeks, last month, as far as changing the staff.
How long do you think that this is sustainable to hold because whenever you do go out and get young, up-and-coming prospective coaches that probably have aspirations to do more, like you see the career arc that Joe Slow was on, whatever it was, he's been kind of on that career rise where it's going like this, right? Wherever he gets the opportunity to be an interim head coach at Louisiana Tech and his name was in the hopper there. And then he was the offensive coordinator there. And then he kind of refines himself and comes to LSU and he starts off as a quarterback's coach. And the way that they talk about him is that he's coming for it all. Every time he steps into a room, he expects to win. And I don't think that settles as offensive coordinator. I think that ultimately his job or what he wants to be is a head coach. And I think you could probably say the same thing for Cortez Hankton and Slade Nagel, who was a quarterback at Barb and tight ends coach, and then he was an offensive coordinator at Tulane. Like, you're assembling this great staff, right? But at the other end of that, at some point you have to pay the price if they are good. If you want to do what you want to accomplish and win a national championship, you would hope to do it with this staff, but with that comes people start picking off your offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators ultimately also.
It's a double-edged sword.
Right.
You have to have people paying attention to your staff and coming after your staff if you're going to put together this type of staff. You have to know and anticipate that Blake Baker's going to be sought after, Cortez Hankton's going to be sought after, Joe Sloan's going to be sought after. Bo Davis is probably going to be sought after at some point over the next couple of years where you're going to have to fight some people off to keep him.
Pay him more.
That's just when you put together a staff that has youth, that has energy, that's got that, that non-fear of competition anywhere, whether it's in the living room, on the practice field, on Saturdays, wherever it is, that's going to draw attention from other people. And that is when you are usually competing at your highest, right? Is when that's happening. So you have to expect that. You have to anticipate that. But that's the grind of you got to stay on top of that stuff. You got to find who's the next, who's the youngest, who's the up and comer, who's the people that are needing to be put into the system, the program, and developed. And that way, when Baker does move on, you've got a guy that's kind of built in, that's been studying him for the last couple of years, and it could be a possibility to upgrade, to motivate or to promote within, right? But what they've done in building this staff, I don't know if they could have done any better. I don't know how they would have done any better.
Where do you think that they put the just blanket answer? Where do you think the biggest premium in these hires was?
This is no guess. Look at it.
It's
Louisiana ties. I think Frank Wilson, now 2 years on the job, and look, Frank Wilson to me as the associate head coach of LSU football is about a perfect position as anybody could fill within the game. That makes more sense than just about any role that anybody has within the sport. For him to be the associate head coach where he can go out, represent the program to the highest level, have the cachet that he does and the reputation he does in the living room with recruits, and now really have the ear and the trust of Brian Kelly to say, hey, man, this is how we got to build this thing. This is how you got to get this thing done. This is how we're going to compete with Kirby Smart, with, all of these Lane Kiffins that are going after the same thing we want. This is how it's got to be done. And I think for Wilson, and we'll probably never know how much influence he's had over the last 2 months, but you got to imagine it's been a lot.
And I don't think you have to have been told that. Right?
No, I'm just going off a feeling.
Exactly, because if you look at the staff that Brian Kelly brought in, and it was very. What I'm most impressed with and most surprised by, to be honest, is Brian Kelly's willingness to be able to adapt to change and be able to embrace kind of other voices in the room. Because when he came in, it felt very totalitarian, very dictator. Brian Kelly's coming in. I'm the head coach. I'm bringing my guys with me.
Again,
that was needed at the time.
I would not hold Brian Kelly. I wouldn't hold him
that against him. I'm not.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold that against him. I think that Brian Kelly was brought in here with an understanding of, hey, and I don't think anybody will ever admit this, but coming out of this legal process that LSU has just gotten out, you can kind of see it if you go in there and you read some of the documents. I mean, it was clear Kelly was brought in here to do some dirty work, right? I mean, it wasn't just about overhauling the football program. It was like, hey man, we got some stuff coming down the pipe legally that we may need some help on. Like, you need to clear some departments for us.
Bring me Southie, Brian
right?
Kelly. The town Brian Kelly for a year.
So I think Kelly stepped into a kind of a blaze of fire that he was like, man, this thing's hot. And look, 10-year, $100 million contract. We got to take care of it. You just need on the front end here. You might have to chew some dirt for us.
Exactly.
So I mean, I think a lot of that was, we'll never hear that publicly. We'll never, probably read that in the books unless they come out 20, 25 years from now. But I mean, I think ultimately there was some stuff, kind of understood that you needed to kind of wash the program out.
Cleanse the palate.
And then let's kind of reset. And now 2 years in, it's like, okay, look, did some good things. We're able to kind of get back on track here. We're able to find our footing here. Here's where we need to get back up to standard, right? And here's where, we may have overcorrected a little bit.
You still want to be LSU.
Right. I mean, and there's still, there's things at LSU that are always going to last the test of time. Sure, you had to catch up from an organizational standpoint in some areas to be competitive. One thing that's always going to last at LSU is that the local talent is always going to be the nucleus of your best teams. And the people that can get that local talent have to have some type of common draw with them. You can't take somebody from the Northeast, or you can't take somebody just because they have an Ivy League degree, put them in somebody's living room and expect it all to work out when they don't relate to a certain person. Yeah, I mean, it's just the facts. And that, I believe, is what Kelly realized over the last 2 years is, okay, the people I brought in to do that, to build the team, to bring the people, it's not going to work.
It did its job in a sense, right? But then you'll be able to, and obviously I feel like the tip of the spear was you get a guy, like you said, Frank Wilson, who's able to kind of give you the tour guide, if you will, of, look, I appreciate what you did. I understand where you're going. This is how you get to that next step. Look, I know guys at Tulane. I know guys that are the wide receiver coach at Georgia. I know guys that we could bring back from Missouri. All have Louisiana ties. All that I've run into. All that I've been either met on the recruiting trail or because they're from Louisiana, they know who I am, and I have great and immense respect for them. This is how you build it at LSU. Because I've never, even Ed Orgeron didn't get this much of a Louisiana-laden staff. And you'd have thought that he'd have been the first one to do it because he kind of saw the vision of, or you'd thought that would have been his vision as Louisiana. I embody this, and I know all of the Louisiana coaches.
Ed had it right. I mean, like, this is not popular opinion, and this is, I think, the further we get away, I think the further Ed gets away from it, he will, have some sleepless nights of, man, what a great opportunity, right? I mean, that you had, but he was building it in the right way of it was about Louisiana, and he may have overshot that mark, right? Too much, where you don't want to go old school LSU, where the place is filled up with the good old boy network and it's everybody doing favors for one another and you're not really progressing, right? You want to make sure and stay on the cutting edge as far as the personnel goes. But you have to understand for Louisiana, look, man, Louisiana is a culture that's tough to explain to people outside of it. Will Wade really opened my eyes to it and really explained it, really easy to understand. I mean, he was able to lay it out. He's like, man, if you come into Louisiana as an outsider, you don't understand how intimidating of a place it is, right? I mean, there's groups of people that all want a piece of you if you're sitting in a spot of power. If you have any type of pull, if you have any type of ability to change the course of something because of what you do or who you know, people are going to latch on to you, right? Because it's such politically driven. It's more politically driven than any other state. That's what it comes down to, is that the politics are just thicker. But if you don't know who, where to trust, your head's got to be on.
Oh, you're looking over your shoulder at every turn.
It's spinning.
Are you helping me or hurting me?
Right. Is this guy out to get me or is he out to help me?
Because he knows a guy that probably wants to be the LSU men's basketball coach, and let's see how deep I can get into the belly of this beast. That's the part of Louisiana that is also, you got the good with the bad. And I think this isn't an LSU football player, but the way that Louisiana works, especially for somebody that's a quote-unquote outsider, look at the way that the Saints embrace Jameis Winston. Like, whenever you're able to ingratiate yourself into the city and become one of us or one of somebody from Louisiana, and you appreciate the culture and what it is, Louisiana will wrap its arms around you. It's just it's a trust thing at the beginning from both sides, where you're both kind of looking at each other across the room, going, "I don't know."
I mean,
it's a feel out.
It's a great listen. It was put this way to me, and I think it's a great way to kind of summarize it. And Will Wade stated this: Louisiana and LSU is the only school that would have kept Will Wade. LSU, Louisiana, was the only school that would have fired Will Wade when it did. Right? Like, I mean, it just kind of explains to, at the time when you're like, oh, they're definitely going to run him. Like, there's no way he's going to make it. He lasted 3 years. And then when you're like, okay, he's in the clear, he's going to make it, it's all good, they fire him. Right? I mean, it's the politics of it that you have to learn to be able to navigate and find your way through. And if you put your money, if you settle, if you bet on the wrong group, on the wrong person, on the wrong horse, you're
done.
You may be dead. I mean, and that I believe is, 2 years in is what Brian Kelly's kind of like looking around and been like, oh, so all of y'all have not had my back. Like, there's been a group of you that have been kind of not working for the best interest of us. Like, okay, let me just go with the guys that I trust. Let me go with the guys that have been standing by me, that have been doing right by me, that have been recognizing what we're trying to build, what we're trying to do, and let's go that way. And that's why I think you've got Frank Wilson's fingerprints all over this new staff, and Frank Wilson's fingerprints will be, and always has been since he's been at LSU, and really over the last 2 years as well, but even more so moving forward, all over the roster. Right? Like, not just the running backs and the big time 5 stars or 4 stars that you'd always kind of unleash Wilson and say, hey man, go save us on that, or go get that guy, go build a relationship, go recruit him. I mean, Frank Wilson recruited everybody from Gabe Relaford to Deshaun McBride to Caden Durham this year. I mean, to Sean Washington. I mean, it got to a point where he was like, hey, I need to go build my team of guys that I can go out and say, let's go build this roster.
And guess what? I'm bringing 18 cats from Louisiana with me.
Yeah.
In his first real recruiting class, where Frank Wilson was unleashed in the state of Louisiana, he got 18 guys to say, yep.
Well, I mean, and look where they already are on 2025.
That's the real one.
I mean, who was on the plane to see Bryce Underwood last Friday?
Frank Wilson and Joe Sloan.
You know, I mean, the obvious premium of what they were looking to get filled on the new staff was Louisiana blood. No more bringing outsiders of guys that are coming in here telling, you know, no more flying over the state of Texas, leaving the state of Louisiana to go find defensive ends, cornerbacks, linebackers. All of that stuff is right here. It's right here.
You don't have to shop anywhere else.
Nowhere. 4-hour radius, 5-hour radius, you can find everything you need to build a championship contending college football team. You don't need frequent flyer miles to coach at LSU. You can drive everywhere. You can drive to Houston. You can drive to New Orleans. You can drive to North Louisiana. You can drive to Mississippi. You can drive to Florida. If you got to jump on a jet and go to South Florida, they got one gassed up waiting on you. So, I mean, I think LSU they've done some really good things under Brian Kelly in the first 2 years of kind of rebuilding and restarting and resetting the program in some certain areas. Now, 2 years in, they're getting back to some of the things that were really working over the last 20 that made LSU the consistent, dominant program on the national front that they were. So I think it's a marriage, it's a merger, it's a belief that LSU's been waiting. You know, I mean, I think all of us, fan base, people who cover LSU, passionate about LSU, you've been kind of waiting on, right? And I mean, to do that on the heels of 10-win seasons under the first 2 years of a guy who took over a program where they had, you know, sub 40 scholarships and coming off of the first losing season since '99, place is in a good spot. I mean, place is in a really good spot. This Michigan stuff's not going. I mean, you know, there's, like we said yesterday, I don't believe any of that stuff. I don't think that that's going to cause a lot of smoke. I think LSU is sitting in a great spot with an incredible staff and a third-year head coach that he said judge him on this year. He's told everybody, wait till year 3. Here we are. If the first part of the grading system of year 3 is how's the staff look, ace, A+. Could not have done any better. I mean, Slade Nagel, addition to the staff. We didn't even talk about Slade Nagel, the play caller.
Play calling.
I mean, a guy is coming in as an experienced play caller on a staff that has elevated 2 new coordinators that's just going to add more confidence, more depth, more knowledge, more IQ to the room. And, oh, by the way, he's from Louisiana and has a ton of success in recruiting the state. I just don't know how Brian Kelly could have done any better in putting together his staff in the offseason when you would have said a month and a half ago, you're going to be without your entire defensive staff and you're going to lose your offensive coordinator. And you would have put on paper, okay, this is what you're going to get in return, though. Bo Davis as your defensive line coach that you're going to take away from. I mean, like, all the while, we're talking about how LSU has gotten better. We have not talked about how they've diminished their opponents as well. I mean, like, that's one thing about, like, this is, like, if you can go add a guy and you improve your staff, it makes it even that much better if you deteriorate one of your opponents. I mean, think about what Eli Drinkowitz thinks about LSU today. I mean, like, what they really think about LSU. I mean, like, Eli, we don't have to tell you your little brother. Your own staff did. Right? I mean, I don't know how pissed Sark and Texas are at LSU for plucking Davis, but that made them weaker. Like, Bo Davis was the lead recruiter on a ton of guys for Texas, was a trusted staff member for Sark. He's replaceable at Texas. I'm not saying that they will, you know, lose because they lost their defensive line, but that's a hit. And to add him to the staff at LSU, it's I don't think that we can really we can't aggregate how
the impact.
That's huge, man. I can't wait to see what they do in the April.